We've been studying now for some time from the Song of Songs, and I appreciate your kind attention and your patience with the study and your interest in the subject. I said in the beginning, this is a book that I think I've neglected too much in teaching. I think generally when you teach on this book, people will say, well, I hadn't heard much about that. And that's a shame, because there's a blessing in it. It is the Song of Songs. And I think the reason why perhaps many of us have shied away from it is because it's a very challenging book. But it's worth the effort, I believe. And I've told you several times in this study, my particular view may not be the majority view. In fact, I don't think that it is. I haven't done a survey. But I don't see Solomon as the hero of this story. I believe he wrote the story. I believe he's involved in the story. But I don't think this is about Solomon teaching us how to be a good husband. I think instead it is about God teaching us what real love, what monogamy, what romantic love is intended to be in God's instruction. So that's the way we've been coming at the book. And we tonight want to look at that section beginning in chapter 6 and verse 11. In which I think we really find maybe the genesis of the book. We've said in this song, like a lot of songs you hear on the radio, if they have a story, they may not tell it in order. There may be glimpses, pictures that come at different times and places. And I think really that what we're reading about tonight, if I understand it correctly, would come if we laid out the book chronologically very early in the book. Matter of fact, maybe the first scene of the book. The old translation reads in verse 11, I went down into the garden of nuts to see the fruits of the valley and to see whether the vine flourished and the pomegranates budded. Or ever I was aware, my soul made me like the chariots of Abinadab. Verse 13, return, return, O Shulamite. Return, return, that we may look upon thee. And then the last part of that verse, what will ye see in the Shulamite? As it were the company of two armies. What in the world is that talking about? Maybe you've struggled with this verse. I think generally speaking, it's considered to be one of the most challenging verses. One of the ways I know that, and I just put this in just, I think maybe to make the point. But I don't know how many of you all have access to Moffat's translation, James Moffat. That's not a particularly popular translation. It's a 20th century single translation. I've heard it referred to. I think C.S. Lewis used to refer to Moffat's translation. He liked it. But I just took mine off the shelf and was looking again at this verse. And this is how Mr. Moffat handles this passage. If you'll notice, and I know it's hard to read, but if you'll notice, he translates verse 11, and he translates verse 13. And under verse 12, he just puts dots across the page. And I thought, that's not a good sign. That might suggest he doesn't have a clue what that's talking about. He just doesn't know how to translate it. Well, maybe it's not that bad, with all due respect to Mr. Moffat. I think that in verse 11 and 12, it's the Shulamite who's speaking in the first person. And she's recounting, I think, her first encounter with Solomon's entourage. She talks about going down. She's taking care of this garden. She goes down to check on the fruits. And that's where she encounters these chariots. We'll talk about that in just a second. And apparently when she sees them, she tends to turn away from them, and they say to her, return, return. To which she responds in the last part of verse 13, what do you want with me? And why do you look at me as it were the company of two armies? There's some really curious expressions here are difficult to translate and have been variously translated. Let's look back in that passage in verse 12. And the old translation translates it, the chariots of Abinadab. Yours may say something different. The word Abinadab literally means noble people, even royal people. And so in some of the translations you find the verse presented this way. Before I was aware, my soul set me upon the chariots of my princely people. The NIV reads, before I realized it, my desire set me among the royal chariots of my people. The ESV reads, "Before I was aware, my desire set me among the chariots of my kinsman a prince." So you can tell there are various translations, but it seems to suggest the idea of this woman encountering the chariots of the nobles, of the princes, of the prince, of the royal. And so here she is, maybe working with her part of this garden, and along comes the chariot of the prince to look after and look over the land that he owns. And so this is where the contact first began. How did this woman come to Solomon's retinue? I think this maybe is the hint that explains that. She is called the Shulamite, which we've been talking about all along. It's the only real reference to her, the only tag for her. It's the only time it's used in the Old Testament, just in 2 times in this verse. What does it mean? That may seem rather simple, but the more you look, the more answers you seem to find. There are some, I don't think many, but there are some who have suggested that the word Shulamite is actually not connected with a place at all. It's connected with Solomon. It's the feminine form of the word Solomon, peace. And so some have suggested that actually, going along with their idea that Solomon marries this woman, that it just means Mrs. Solomon. Well, that's not widely accepted. It is accepted by some. It always begs the question to me, how many Mrs. Solomons were there? There were 1,000 boys all over, weren't there? A lot of Mrs. Solomons around. Enough to fill a city. Several small villages. I don't think that's the case. Others have suggested that it's related to the word Salem. And it actually is a reference going back to Jerusalem. And so what he's saying about this is that she's actually a woman of Jerusalem. But I don't think that fits the story very well either. She seems to be quite different from the daughters of Jerusalem who are in Solomon's retinue, among other reasons. There are some who think, one fellow said, it's an unidentified place called Shulam. Well, that could well be. But the problem is it is unidentified. I don't know of any Bible map that dares to put a place and say, this is Shulam. It could well be that there was a village called Shulam. We just don't know. Another popular idea, because of the very similar spellings, is that perhaps it's not intended to be Shulam, but Shunem. Now, we do know something about Shunem. That is a place we know something about. We have several references to that. And again, I don't want to chase all these rabbits. I think it would just add to confusion. But I remember reading, going through the materials on the Song of Solomon, one fellow, he cooked up an idea that indeed this was Shunem. And in fact, the woman in this story is none other than another woman we know from Shunem who had a connection with the royal house, Abishai. Remember Abishai? Over in 1 Kings 1. She's the young woman that was there to sort of aid the king, not sleep with him, but to aid him and comfort him in his old age. And he made up this great story, fascinating story, about how Solomon was after her and that anyway, I won't get into all that, but I don't believe that's true. I don't believe that's at all the case. No evidence for it to my mind, other than just the fact that Shunem and Shulam sound alike. But if it is Shunem, we know where that was. That's up in the Jezreel Valley, up in the north part of the country. And some of the maps you'll find, actually, the one over here on the right as you're looking, says Shulam/Shunem. So I don't know if that's so or not. But what's going on here with the Shunammite? This woman, I think, from somewhere up in the north, who obviously has been keeping a garden there for years and has somehow come in contact with the people connected with Solomon. They have been rather intrigued by her. They take her back with them. This is the reading of our passage from the Amplified Bible. If you're familiar with the Amplified Bible, you know it says in the title exactly what it is. The Amplified Bible is sort of a Bible/commentary. And the reason why I have these two different colored in the font is not for style or even emphasis. It's more to differentiate between the parts they write in and the parts that maybe are more in the text itself. But I think they probably have a pretty good handle on what's going on here. even though they take liberties with the text, more of a commentary than a translation. That's what the Amplified Bible provides. But anyway, this is how the Amplified Bible renders our passage. The Shulamite replied, I went down into the nut orchard one day to look at the green plants of the valley and to see where the grapevine had budded and the pomegranates were in flower. And before I was aware of what was happening, my desire to roam about had brought me into the area of the princes of my people, the king's retinue. I began to flee, but they called me, Return, return, O Shulamite, return, return, that we may look upon you. I replied, What is there for you to see in the poor little Shulamite? They answered, As upon the dance before the two armies, or the dance of Mahanaim. That word, two armies, maybe in your translation is translated Mahanaim. And that's familiar to us if we've been studying in the book of Genesis as we have. That's where Jacob, you remember, the Lord appeared to him. He had his group there, and then the Lord's host was there, and he called it Mahanaim, two hosts. And it seems that again, I don't have biblical proof of this, but that from that time, Mahanaim was always a special place, a holy place. There were certain rituals that maybe took place at Mahanaim. And some of that has been suggested by certain sources, might have included even the sacred dance. So when they talk about the dance of the Mahanaim, that might be what they have in mind. It may be that they're not saying this. It may be the Shulamite saying all of this. And she's saying, in effect, referring to such things, why would you look at me as if I'm some sort of spectacle? If they said it, they're saying, we're looking at you and want you because you are spectacular. I believe that's the way the king felt about it. I believe that's the way Solomon felt. And if you continue reading, and we divided up here a new chapter, but I think the thought continues, chapter 7 and verse 1, we find the king's advance. And if I understand it right, this final advance. When the king and his people first saw her, they were struck with her. And as we continue, here toward the end of our story, the king continues to be fascinated with her, filled with her, in fact, obsessed with her. This is chapter 7 and verse 1 from the old translation. How beautiful are thy feet with shoes, O prince's daughter. The joints of thy thighs are like jewels, the work of the hands of a cunning workman. Thy navel is like a round goblet which wanteth not liquor. Thy belly is like a heap of wheat set about with lilies. Thy two breasts are like two young roes that are twins. Thy neck is like a tower of ivory. Thine eyes like the fish pools in Heshbon. By the gate of Babarim. Thy nose is like the tower of Lebanon that looks toward Damascus. Let me pause again. You know, the Song of Solomon does not stop to say, and then the king said. But can't you tell Solomon when he's speaking here? I mean, after a while, you just get to recognize it. I said, that's not the shepherd. That's got to be Solomon. Thy head, verse 5, is like Carmel, and thy hair of thy head like purple. The king is held in the galleries. We'll talk about that phrase more in just a moment. How fair, how pleasant art thou, O love, for delights. This thy stature is like to a palm tree, and thy breast to the clusters of grapes. And then he said, I will go up to the palm tree. I will take hold of the boughs thereof. Now also thy breast shall be as clusters of the vine, and the smell of thy nose like apples, and the roof of thy mouth like the best wine. That's through verse 9a. Let's pause just a moment here. It's obvious that the king is filled with desire and even lust for her. And I think maybe this is the writer's way of answering the question in chapter 6 and verse 13. The Shulamite has said, what do you want with me? And the king's answer is, you are a masterpiece. That's why I want you. You are desirable. and he's obsessed with her. We've seen this before. We saw it in chapter 1 and verse 9. Again, Solomon speaking there and complimenting her, comparing her to a company of horses in Pharaoh's chariot. In chapter 4, I think we saw the king again speaking, talking about her physique, her beauty. In chapter 6 and in verse 4, thou art as Tirzah, as comely as Jerusalem, terrible as an army with banners. Made the point in the last lesson, that expression, terrible as an army, is a curious thing, but what it's saying is you are intimidatingly beautiful and enigmatic and independent. He is obsessed with her. She's not like anybody else in his harem. That is true. And his desire has grown and grown as he continues to pursue her. The Cambridge Bible, in writing about this passage, says that Solomon tries his last effort, praising with passion the attraction of his captive. It's always the same kind of comparison, drawn from things most precious, most esteemed, most rare. In one modern speech translation in chapter 7 and verse 1, how beautiful are your feet in their sandals, noble daughter. The curves of your thighs are like ornaments, like the work of an artist's hands. That's the way he says, he thinks about her. You are a work of art. He's not admiring her mind. He is taken with her physically. Your head is held high like Mount Carmel. Your hair is so lovely it holds a king prisoner. That's this modern translation. In the old translation in verse 5, the king is held in its galleries. Yours may say something more like what we have on the chart there. But he feels imprisoned by his obsession for this woman. And then that obsession falls over into lust. And he propositions her and expresses his desire to take her physically. May your mouth be like good wine, he says in verse 9. And then I think you have a change in the speaker. I believe in chapter 7, verse 9, there's an interruption here. And I think there is a reason. I think there are reasons to believe that. As Solomon says, your mouth is like the best wine. It is the Shulamite who returns and says, yes, for my beloved. For my beloved, that goes down sweetly, causing the lips of those who are asleep to speak. I am my beloved's, and his desire is toward me. Come, my beloved, let us go forth into the field. Let us lodge in the villages. Let us go get up early to the vineyards to see if the vine flourish, whether the tender grape appear and the pomegranates bud forth. There I will give thee my loves. The mandrakes give a smell, and at our gates are all manner of pleasant fruits, new and old, which I have laid up for thee, O my beloved. Even some of the other translations, the NIV, for example. You know, the NIV, if you have a copy of that, it will have in brackets here trying to label who's speaking. And all it does is generally says he and she. I get the idea the NIV writers, or the translators, only thought there was one he. That's not my view. But even they recognize there's a shift here in the speaker from the man to the woman. The NIV reads in verse 9, he, and your mouth is like the best wine. She, may the wine go straight to my beloved. The change in speaker is not arbitrary. Mr. Garrett, in a footnote, reads here, writing about this passage, the form, dode, beloved, is used only by the woman. Yet she is the singer, the speaker here. So I think grammatically there's a reason to suggest that we have an interruption of the sentence. And Solomon is speaking and he's laying it on thick and making it clear his desire for her and to want to marry her and sleep with her. And she says defiantly, yes, my love is special for my beloved. If that's what she's saying, it certainly, I think, encourages us to recognize that it's possible to say no when you ought to say no. And that's what I would say to our young people who maybe will face temptation somewhere along the line they have not faced before. And the world may tell you that, well, you know, after all, what could you do? You can do right. That's what you can do. You can make a stand for what's right. You don't have to give in, despite the pressure that's placed. And that's what I think we find in this passage. She says, in the face of this strong advance by Solomon, and the last that we read of in the book, by the way, she says, my love is for my beloved. My affections are laid up for him, not for you, for him. Even if he's a rich, powerful guy, handsome guy, you can still say no. And you ought to. Chapter 8, she continues, I think, with her attentions toward her beloved. We said from the very beginning, I think from the second verse of this book, as we divide it, that even when he's not there, he's there. Even when he's not present physically, she can hear his voice, and she speaks to him. And so in chapter 8 and verse 1, Solomon has failed to convince her, to pressure her into accepting him and accepting a place in his harem. And so in verse 1 of chapter 8, oh, she's speaking to her beloved, oh, that thou wert as my brother, that sucked the breast of my mother. When I should find thee without, I would kiss thee. Yea, I should not be despised. I would lead thee and bring thee into my mother's house, who would instruct me. I would cause thee to drink of the spiced wine, of the juice of my pomegranate. His left hand should be under my head, his right hand should embrace me. I charge you, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, that you stir not up, nor awake my love till he please. This is a curious passage again. What's this business about I wish you were as my brother? What is that talking about? Well, there's certainly nothing here that's some sort of perverted, integrated family romantic relationship. That's not at all the idea here. No incest that's being spoken of. I think, if I understand it, what she's saying is this. I long for your touch, your physical affection. And in our society, that might be, in their society, that might be considered scandalous. But if you were my brother, I could hug your neck. and that's what she longs for. Nothing here perverted. What she's saying is that she wishes that they were kin only because she longs to touch him. She longs to hug him. And those spontaneous signs of affection, by the way, ought never to be discounted by couples. It is a great pleasure. I think when people who are not married are laying all over each other's laps, there are all kind of wrong things about that. I'm just telling you, that's dangerous from the word go. But when you find this physical affection among those who are married to each other, that's a glorious thing and something that ought to be recognized as being valuable. She talks about her mother's house. I would lead thee and bring thee into my mother's house, who would instruct me. What's that all about? I like what one fellow wrote about that. Mr. Adonai suggested that it's a lovely trait in the Shulamite, that even after all she's seen, all the palaces and all the purple and all the finery and all the gold and silver, what she longs for, what she thinks of home, is the humble abode, whatever it might have been, of her mother's house. The father's not mentioned, again, because it seems maybe he's passed away. He's only referred to once, and he doesn't seem to be a part of her life. It hasn't been for a while. Her brothers have been the ones involved in her rearing. But her mother is still there, and she longs to be with her beloved in her mother's house. And she would be my teacher. She longs, with the approval of her mother, to marry her beloved and let her mother instruct her in how to be a wife. I think that's what he's talking about there. It's important for people to remember that being a husband, being a wife is a learned behavior. We're not born knowing that. Little baby sea turtles know how to swim. Nobody had to teach them, didn't have to take any lessons, didn't have to go to the wild. But people do not know how to be a husband or a wife. That's why we do it so badly. We don't listen to advice. We don't listen to instruction. Of course, the instruction comes from God. And that might be a question you would ask yourself, and I would ask myself. How much of God's instruction do I apply at my house? Am I just following my will, my desire, what I've learned from my upbringing, which may or may not be good? Or am I trying to be the husband God would have me to be, the wife God would have me to be? Part of that is involved in just simply reading the Scriptures and making a concerted effort to apply it. But, don't you, when you read this verse about her longing to learn from her mother in relating to her beloved, don't you think about Titus 2? Titus 2, we were looking at this this morning, weren't we? But the first part of that chapter, speak thou the things which become sound doctrine. And Paul writes, that the aged men be sober, grave, temperate, sound in faith and charity and patience. Notice verse 3, aged women likewise, that they be in behavior as becometh holiness, not false accusers, not given to much wine, teachers of good things, that they may teach the young women to be sober, to love their husbands, to love their children. Isn't that just natural? Well, there is a natural affection. But I'll tell you, there's a lot of wisdom that has to be taught and learned. Some things we learn, sadly, just trial and error, but we can learn a lot less from error if I will listen. Listen. And I think that's what she's referring to. I long to start this relationship. I long to be back in the country and away from all this. I long to learn from my mother how to be a wife to my husband. This, I think, is still worthy to follow. There's also, back in our text in 8:2, this business about the pomegranate juice. What's that all about? I don't believe that the references here are to drunkenness or glorifying drunkenness on any level. I like what, this is a quotation from the Cambridge Bible that says, the juice of the pomegranate was and still is expressed for a cooling drink or a sherbet. It's something sweet. In a place where refined sugar wasn't really known, this was something that was special. And there's a sweetness about this relationship that God describes it. I think that's a lot more relatable and admirable than drunkenness. Something that makes me drunk is not necessarily going to be helpful to me. But the sweetness of this relationship, as God designed it, we can make a bitterness out of it. But that's not God's design, ever. And then in verse 3, she longs for this embrace. She's looking for that day, that physical closeness that's so important. It's such a shame when we as married people get mad and pout, and we're not going to talk to each other, not going to look at each other, all that kind of nonsense. When we ought to always be open to each other. Whatever disagreements we have, we're never going to be willing to treat our partner like an enemy. And she longs for that closeness that comes with the fruition of this relationship. And one last time, she charges the daughters of Jerusalem. We've seen that in chapter 2. We've seen it again in chapter 3. And what she says here, as she's closer than ever to this, she's saying, don't you see now how foolish it is to push me towards Solomon when this is my beloved? This is my beloved. This is what I long for. This is where my heart is. Well, in chapter 8 and verse 5, I think we have a great moment in the story. Somebody speaks. I wonder who this is. This is the crowd. This is somebody. This is the onlookers who speak. Who is this? Let's see, I've got this on the chart, don't I? I'm sorry. Who is this that comes up from the wilderness, leaning upon her beloved? That's a great picture, isn't it? We've seen these folks in all kinds of circumstances, and sometimes they seem like they were mountains that divided them, and a lot of self-recrimination, a lot of sadness, a lot of crying and dreaming and wishing. But now here they are, coming from the wilderness, and she's leaning upon her beloved, and she says, I raised thee up under the apple tree. There thy mother brought thee forth. There she brought thee forth that bare thee. This chorus maybe of her compatriots, as somebody said, announced the arrival that they have come and they are now together. They have been reunited. Who is speaking here? Well, that's an interesting question, and folks who know the language delve into it, and some think it's the Shulamite, some think it's the beloved. And I don't want to get too much in the weeds here about some of these technical issues. You can research this, maybe you have. But the pronouns here in the latter part of verse 5, thee, thy mother brought thee forth, she brought thee forth, it bare thee. Cambridge Bible makes the point that they are masculine in gender in the Masoretic, the Hebrew text. And another fellow, Mr. Carr, writes, the Hebrew has all masculine endings in this section. So whoever's speaking is referring to him. And so that would suggest it's the Shulamite who's speaking. Some of the other translations change it to the feminine form, but as he suggests, there's no real support in the text for that. So let's just assume that that's the way it is, that it's the Shulamite speaking about him and taking him back to where he was born, taking him back to this place where she raised him up, quote unquote. She's calling to mind that place, not in Jerusalem, but up north of his birthplace, and the place where they fell in love, the beginning of their relationship. It can't be Solomon. Solomon wasn't born up north in Jezreel somewhere. He certainly wasn't born under a tree somewhere up there. I'm pretty sure of that. So I just don't think, with all respect to the smart folks who take that view, that this is Solomon. Well, what does she mean when she talks about raising him up? Good question. And the best answer I can give you is that expression to raise up doesn't mean necessarily to raise up like you raise a child. She's not his mother. I suspect she's a little younger than he is. But it's a verb meaning to stir up, to arouse. Maybe your translation translates it that way. The American Standard renders it this way: under the apple tree I awakened thee. Now that could be literal. Maybe he was taking a nap one day and she woke him up, but it could also be that their feelings for each other were awakened, that their relationship began, that their mutual love began. She's back in that area where these two fell in love together. Mr. Ravel puts it this way: the girl recalls to him that she had conquered his heart under the apple tree, that is to say, under the auspices of sincere and mutual affection. From this comes her unalterable fidelity and strength of her attachment. It's a sentimental place where these two fell in love, where their hearts were one. That's what she's back to, and she's so thrilled about that as she leans upon her beloved. And then chapter 8 and verse 6. And these are great words. The old translation reads, set me as a seal upon thine heart, as a seal upon thine arm, for love is strong as death, jealousy is cruel as the grave. The coals thereof are coals of fire, which have a most vehement flame. That's the old translation of these words. Set me as a seal upon thine heart. What's that talking about? Well, you know what a seal is. A seal is like a signet ring. One modern speech translation renders this phrase, wear me as a signet ring on your heart, as a ring on your hand. She desires her mark on her man, as he has marked her emotionally in terms of loyalty. Again, the Good News Bible reads, close your heart to every love but mine. Hold no one in your arms but me. Love is as powerful as death. That's a pretty strong statement too, isn't it? Love is as strong as death, the Net Translation reads. Passion is as unrelenting as Sheol. The Old Translation renders that jealousy. Jealousy. This is Mr. Carr. Jealousy or passion is not to be understood in a negative way. The green-eyed monster, he says, but rather as an assertion of the rightful claims of possession. Our God is a jealous God. In that same sense, jealousy can be bad, no doubt, but it's not here used that way. I think the jealousy in this passage is a good thing. It's a right thing. It's indispensable. It's inseparable from true love. You know, only in our perverted society have we come up with this idea of open marriage, which is not marriage at all. It's just, just license. It's just pure fornication. But you've heard that term, and you're aware that that's a practice some people are proud of. Let me tell you, you don't have a relationship if you don't care who somebody's sleeping with, or you don't care who you sleep with. There's something desperately wrong with that. That's just pure selfishness. There's nothing about that that's related to God's concept of marriage. God's concept of marriage is exclusive by nature. There are things that ought not to be shared. We can share compassion with one another. We can share benevolence with, but these are things that belong only to one, as they belong to us. God is a jealous God in that sense. That loyalty goes to no one but Him. He's first and no one else. And He loves us. And I find it interesting too, in the old translation, in the latter part of verse 6, which hath a most vehement flame. He's talking about the fire of love. You've heard somebody say, maybe you've said this yourself. There are two books in the Old Testament in which the name of God is not used. One of them is Esther, and one of them is the Song of Solomon. And if you've got the old translation, you can't find God's name in the Song of Solomon. But I think it's fair to say that actually God's name is here and is found in this expression. Some of the other translations reflect that. Its flashes are flashes of fire, a most vehement flame, a most raging flame, a most blazing flame. But actually the Hebrew includes the word Yah, literally the flame of Yah, of Jehovah, a flame of supernatural power, one that is kindled and cherished by God. Cambridge says, Ewald with fair probability suggests that we should read this, its flames are the flames of Yah. The American Standard reads that way. The flashes thereof are flashes of fire, a very flame of Jehovah, as does Darby, as does the Young's literal translation. The ESV reads, its flashes are the flashes of fire, the very flame of the Lord. So the Lord's name is, in that sense, used in this book, though it doesn't make it through every translation. Some just see it as a superlative. It's just the most fiery fire. But actually, literally, it's the fire of Jehovah. What could that mean? Some have suggested it's talking about lightning, but not literally. It's the idea of a fire that sparks a powerful, burning, zealous devotion. It's a love that has God as its origin. It was His creation. Marriage, romantic love, is His creation. It's the fire of God in that sense. And then in verse 7, another great expression of the book. Excuse me. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can the floods drown it. If a man would give all the substance of his house for love, he would be utterly condemned. I like what one modern speech translation puts it. Water cannot put it out. No flood can drown it. And if anybody tried to buy it with his wealth, contempt is all they'd get. That's right. That's a good paraphrase of that passage there. It's unquenchable, it's unpurchasable, as one fellow said. And that's what had happened in this story as I read it. Mr. Adney says, the court of Solomon made every effort to try to destroy her, the Shulamite's love for the shepherd. All possible means were employed for buying her love for the king. Both utterly failed. All the floods of scorn which the harem ladies had poured over her love for the country lad could not quench it. All the wealth of the kingdom could not buy it for Solomon. Where true love exists, no opposition can destroy it. Where it does not, no money can purchase it. Pretty good point. Well, I'm so tempted to finish this. We're so close, but I don't want to exhaust your patience. So I'll figure something out here. What I do want to do when I finish the narrative, and that's what we try to do, finish the story, I'd like to spend a lesson on what I think are the great lessons from the song that I hope will just reinforce the points we've tried to make. But I think it's a really practical point. I'm just thinking ahead. Next week we have our first Sunday, and that has a special schedule. So it'll probably be at least the second Sunday before I can do that. But I would like to do that, and I would appreciate your remembrance for that, and I would appreciate your kind attention as you always give and your feedback on this lesson and on the series as a whole. You've been very kind in your attention, and I appreciate that.